After a week of overhaul at the Boston Navy Yard, USS Slater DE 766 and her crew got underway from Pier 7 at 1100 for Key West, Florida. As she departed the harbor, honors were rendered to the flagship PG 63, and after exiting the channel, 19 knots were rung up, and Slater passed buoy number 1 abeam to starboard, and the peak hill buoy shortly after. General quarters were sounded at 1421, and 12 minutes later, a single Mark VI depth charge was expended for a drill. At 1445, a 4-hour trial run at flank speed began. Just as the trial run was coming to an end, a heavy fog bank set in, and speed was reduced to 19 knots as visibility decreased to 100 yards. A forecastle watch was set for extra eyes, and course was changed briefly to avoid another vessel, and the fog signals were initiated. These conditions continued into the early morning hours of the 12th. Speed was increased slightly to 20 knots, and the running lights were temporarily turned on to increase visibility. Following a steering casualty drill, an actual steering casualty occurred at 0443 when power was shut off to the pilot house. Fortunately, this was restored after 5 minutes. And just after morning muster, the SL radar gear was secured for repairs and all clocks and chronometers were wound. At 1343, while steering 182 degrees per gyro compass, the general alarm sounded. This was not another of Captain Blanc's drills. For the second time in a week, and third time since commissioning, a fire was discovered on board. This time, it was located in the muffler room. All engines were ordered stopped, and all 20mm ammunition was removed from the ready service lockers aft of the muffler room vent. The fire was quickly extinguished and found to be rags stuffed in wooden boxes that had somehow combusted. All engines were started and ordered ahead 2/3. Deck court for Owen E. Jones, Seaman First Class, and Gerald W. Spink commenced at 1452, with Lieutenant Butler overseeing, and they adjourned about 20 minutes later. A short general quarters was called at 1611 after a merchant vessel was spotted. Once it was determined to be friendly, the ship secured from general quarters, and that evening, an investigative committee met to discuss the muffler room fire. Slater continued sailing independently the next day. Just after sunrise, the number 4 diesel engine was shut down to repair a broken fresh water pipe in the cooling system. With it down, the port shaft was down to 400 RPMs, while the starboard shaft was at 575 RPMs. The ship was still able to make 17 knots. In the afternoon, a gunnery exercise was conducted, and 5 depth charges were expended along with some 20mm. At 1615, the findings of the previous day's deck court were published. Spink was found guilty for being absent over leave and was reduced in rating to Seaman Second Class. Jones was also found to be guilty of being absent over leave and sentenced to 10 days of confinement to the ship and the loss of $16 a month for 2 months. Speed was reduced to 1/3 at 1841 for general quarters exercise and target practice. All guns opened fire on a balloon target, and once completed, all engines were ordered ahead full, and 1 Mark VI depth charge was released and set to 600 feet, but it failed to explode. Speed was reduced again to 1/3, and another was dropped for 550 feet. This depth charge did explode after about 70 seconds. In total, 50 rounds of 3-inch 50 caliber, 174 rounds of 40mm, and 596 rounds of 20mm, along with 5 depth charges, 2 arbors, and 2 number 3 impulse charges were expended. All the while, the number 4 engine was still being repaired, and later that night, the bilges were pumped, probably because of cooling water in the bilges. Slater's journey down the East Coast ended on the 14th when she arrived at Key West, Florida. The Mantilla Shoal Light and Jupiter Light were both spotted early that morning. She entered the Key West Channel 1819, and an hour later, she was moored starboard side to Pier B with 6 lines. The next morning, ship and crew got underway with the captain at the con and navigator on the bridge. Once she cleared the channel, Slater commenced the anti-submarine exercise GA with sister ship USS Olson DE 765 and PCS 1431. She fired 4 training hedgehogs at 0929, and the 3 ships continued searching for the submerged submarine until Slater retired to the Orange State dock. Yeoman First Class Argentar left the ship that evening for 10 days of liberty, set to expire on the 25th. And W.J. Wilkes, storekeeper First Class, departed on a 10-day leave. Seaman Second Class Clinton Folds was transferred to the receiving station under guard of Boatswain's Mate Second Class Bridge. Nothing of note happened on the 16th. More of the crew were granted varying degrees of leave. At 1300, all the ammunition stored below the waterline was removed from the ship and transported to a shoreside storage facility for temporary storage. On the 17th, Slater departed the dock and rendezvoused at the torpedo firing range under the orders of Lieutenant Lindquist of Fleet Air Wing 5. Slater was to act as a target for torpedo bombers, and once she arrived at the designated area, 8 TBF Avengers made torpedo runs on the ship. This continued for the remainder of the day until Slater returned to Orange State Pier at 1901. For the next 2 months, Slater will remain in the Key West, Florida area for anti-submarine and anti-aircraft training. Next week, she will suffer a hull penetration from a training torpedo striking below the waterline, and the ice room will flood. Stay tuned for an updated look at the ice room today. Be sure you are following us both on YouTube and on Facebook for the latest news on the restoration and preservation of USS Slater.